Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are here to take your stack of source, the articles, the detailed fan critique, the production note, and distill it all down to the essential, the surprising, and in today's case, the truly outrageous.
It's the big one today.
It is. Today, we are strapping in for the final massive installment of a global phenomenon, the critique surrounding Stranger Things 5.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're dealing with the final chapter of a series that, according to our sources, had an immense cultural and financial weight placed upon its shoulders.
Absolutely.
For years, this show defined a generation of streaming. And, when it comes to these long-running narratives, the ending is often the only part that truly lasts in the memory.
That's so true.
And our source material suggests that this finale might be remembered for all the wrong reasons.
And that matters because, as we know, for an audience that has invested years, often close to a decade into these characters, the stakes couldn't be higher. A failure at the finish line is described in the sources as a bitter disappointment that truly sticks with. It just leaves a permanent sour taste.
It does. Think of the emotional capital the fans spent on. If the conclusion feel, and this is a quote, tone deaf or disloyal to the spirit of the show they originally fell in love with, that investment feels betrayed. This isn't just about a few plot holes. It's about a fundamental breach of narrative trust.
And speaking of investment, we have to start with the key data shock right out of the gate, because this wasn't just some passion project. It was a financial behemoth that Netflix was banking on to justify their entire model.
The numbers are staggering, and they fundamentally change how we have to evaluate the final product. The sources report that the total budget for season 5 was estimated to be between $400 and $480 million.
400. Wait, that's nearly $500 million for a single season of television.
A single season. That just puts it into a different category entirely.
It has.
It certainly does. If we break that down, it's roughly $50 to $60 million per episode.
Episode? That's insane.
It's not just a big TV budget. This is blockbuster movie money being spent on every single hour of the final season.
Wow.
This massive financial stake, it just underscores how crucial this finale was to Netflix. They needed this to be the ultimate defining water cooler moment that justified the entire spend.
So when you see that level of investment contrasted to that the finale was, convoluted, rushed, and a narrative failure, the discrepancy becomes incredibly jarring.
Exactly. The money is on the screen, but the story, according to the sources, just isn't there.
Okay, let's start with the show's unique standing. Stranger Things occupied a very specific cultural need. Our sources call it the closest thing Netflix had to a true water show.
Right, meaning everyone's talking about it at the same time, which is it's increasingly rare in our fragmented streaming.
It really is.
And what's remarkable is its structural survival. It defied that infamous Netflix curse where so few shows make it past the third season. And unlike many series that peak early, Stranger Things actually gained popularity over time, becoming a true global cultural force.
It's a paradox, though, because despite this phenomenal popularity, the critique we received is incredibly sharp. There's a widespread recognition that, and I'm quoting here, no one would say that this has been a consistently good show and no one would call it high art.
And that tension is absolutely key. The cynical view, which is frequently cited, is that the entire show primarily functions as nostalgia bait.
Okay.
It's designed as an 80s greatest hits album, but, played by a highly skilled cover band.
Yeah.
It taps into that specific generational memory without necessarily having deep original narrative substance.
But the source material is fair enough to acknowledge the show's undeniable strengths. Even if they call it nostalgia bait, they admit the production team nailed the look and the feel of the 1980s.
They absolutely did. And more importantly, the show's true, consistent strength was always its excellent character work.
That's what people came back for.
Exactly. The audience wasn't tuning in for the lore. They were tuning in for Hopper, Joyce, Eleven, Lucas, Dustin, Will, the core group dynamics.
Right.
The show brilliantly borrowed from the 80s culture, the music, the mall aesthetics, the comic, and nodded heavily towards Stephen King and Spielberg. It leveraged a cultural atmosphere where kids were capable heroes and the adults were, often well-meaning, but totally clueless.
And we can't forget the show's massive real-world impact. It drove a huge resurgence in Dungeons & Dragons interest, and it connected suburban life with these conspiracy theories like MKUltra in a really digestible, entertaining way.
For sure. And season 1 was universally praised as magnificent because it was so tight, it was character-focused, and centered on mystery. But the sources note that momentum quickly stalled.
It did get a little repetitive.
Very. It became repetitive in season 2 and was deemed corny and ridiculous by season 3. We saw these repetitive character arcs, like Joyce repeatedly turning into the crazy lady trying to solve the paranormal.
And Hopper's redemption arc seemingly resetting every single season, often regressing him into a complete buffoon.
Yes, but here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources cite season 4 as a genuine return to form, pulling the series out of that corny territory.
And what do they attribute that?
Well, the sources suggest this was due to two major, and I think overdue, additions. First, the introduction of a genuinely compelling new character who felt authentically 80, the metalhead Eddie Munson.
People loved Eddie.
He became an immediate, massive fan favorite because he was distinct, he was loyal, and he provided proper representation of that subculture.
And the second element, finally giving the existential threat a face.
Yes, an antagonist that actually mattered, Vecna or Henry Creel. And while the sources concede Vecna's backstory was essentially a massive retcon, a way to explain away the previously vague mind flayer material that wasn't going anywhere, it worked beautifully to raise the stake and provide some real psychological terror.
Season 4 also successfully separated the adults and children, which allowed those core dynamics to breathe again.
It did, but that structural success came at a definite cost, though, which sets up the challenge for Season 5. The source material repeatedly points out that the two characters doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the narrative renewal in Season 4, Eddie and Dr. Brenner, both died. Which meant the Season 5 writers had to essentially restart the clock on the narrative tension and emotional core, all while facing those immense cultural expectations we talked about.
And that leads us to the most worrying structural critique, which sets a chilling precedent for the rest of our discussion. The Game of Thrones comparison.
It's the comparison no show wants, especially one built on such massive fan affection. The source explicitly warns that, like HBO and the creators of Game of Thrones discovered with Season 8, it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
And that comparison hits so hard because Game of Thrones was, for many seasons, lauded for its writing quality, which is arguably something Stranger Things never really achieved.
Right.
So what exactly does this comparison?
It highlights the potential for catastrophic narrative failure driven by audience betrayal. The source explains that when a highly invested audience feels the conclusion is tone-deaf or disloyal to the established spirit of the characters in the world, even if the spectacle is massive, that disappointment is magnified tenfold. For Stranger Things 5, the fear wasn't just poor writing. It was the potential for the show to fundamentally misunderstand the characters it had cultivated for years, swapping sincerity for forced spectacle.
A failure Game of Thrones Season 8 was off of.
Exactly. So that gives us a heavy standard to measure the rest of the season against. If they lost the spirit of the show, the huge budget and anticipation only served to amplify the resulting failure.
Okay, so let's jump right into the narrative start 5. Season 4 ends on that intense cliffhanger. Our heroes are back together. Hawkins is literally split open by the gates and the apocalypse.
Right.
Given the 3-year production gap and the actors aging, a time jump was expected.
And this is the first major structural point of failure identified by the source material, the time jump debacle. The show implemented an 18-month jump, but the critique is severe. It was narratively insufficient.
Insufficient in what way?
Well, it wasn't nearly long enough to sufficiently explain the character's natural aging, which was pretty pronounced by this point, or to provide necessary narrative distance from the apocalyptic ending.
So it felt arbitrary.
Completely. You end Season 4 with literal world-ending cracks forming in the earth, but 18 months later, the show implies everyone just went back home as if a massive, city-destroying dimensional fissure could be covered up by simply ignoring it.
So it completely undermines the severity of the previous season's cliffhanger.
Totally. But wait. The source did say it was long enough to explain one thing.
Oh, what was that?
The one element the 18-month jump successfully accommodated, Hopper's quarantine weight, referencing the character's physical appearance after his time in the Russian gulag.
Of course.
Beyond this minor detail, the time jump felt like a logistical necessity for the actors, not a narrative tool for the story.
So they come back to a town that should be ground zero for a global emergency, but is instead treated with this perplexing casual. What is Hawkins like in 19?
The sources paint a picture of Hawkins, Indiana, operating as a full-blown U.S. military state under strict quarantine.
Which should be huge.
It should be international news, a massive Cold War event. Yet we have no idea how the rest of the world perceives this. They completely abandon the narrative technique of showing newspaper headlines or news clips, which they used so effectively in earlier seasons to establish global context.
And how did the writers choose to deliver this crucial
through the clumsiest method possible. It's an exposition dump delivered by a minor character who is now the local DJ, Rockin' Rob.
Oh, no.
He is delivering details about the town's status mandatory medical checks, no-go zones, checkpoints that the townspeople of Hawkins supposedly already know. It makes the scene painfully obvious as a tool for the viewer.
And the reason for this military quarantine, the source material had a genuinely bizarre for it.
The official, publicly reported reason for the military lockdown is upside-down dandruff.
I have to stop you there. Upside-down dandruff. That's the official reason a major U.S. town in 1987 is a full military.
That is the reported cover story for the quarantine. It suggests that residents were breathing in spores or residual material from the other side, making them potentially contaminated.
That's just,
The critique here is profound. A show that prided itself on 80s authenticity and immersive world building completely sacrifices logic and realism for a throwaway line.
And the biggest sign of this failure.
The massive cracks in the earth from the S4 finale, the literal sign of the apocalypse, were simply covered up with metal plates.
You're kidding.
Nope. The critique argues the show lost its immersion by treating these monumental events with such superficial, almost comical solution.
Now, on to the cast list. We are at the finale. The stakes are maximum. The narrative needs to be laser-focused on resolution, yet the source immediately points out the issue of cast bloat.
Yes.
And the decision to introduce more new characters. That just seems utterly counterintuitive.
It is. The existing cast was already struggling for adequate screen time and meaningful arcs. The source feared, and accurately it seemed, that adding new faces to an already bloated cast would inevitably steal focus.
Which would delay the critical lore explanations, like Vecna's origin or the upside-down mechanics.
Leading directly to a rushed ending and a prolonged, irrelevant epilogue. It's a domino effect.
Let's look at the specific new characters that drew the most immediate and critical fire. The new evil military presence.
Right. A fresh batch of evil military guys shows up, led by a commanding officer played by Linda Hamilton, who is notably playing a male character.
Interesting choice.
The Force was particularly critical of this, suggesting Hamilton was trying to outdo her insufferable performance in Terminator: Dark Fate. But the more relevant critique is the historical inaccuracy.
Okay.
A show meticulously detailing 1980s culture, the source noted, has completely forgotten that women weren't commanding special forces in 1987. The show just sacrifices its period authenticity for modern casting choice.
So, a show dedicated to 80s nostalgia seemingly ignored the 80s reality of military command structure. Who was the other major introduction or recast that dominated the early?
That would be the recast Holly Wheeler, Mike and Nancy's younger sister.
Who was just a background kid before, right? With a light bright.
Exactly. She was unexpectedly elevated to become the brand new primary protagonist for a major chunk of the final arc, even earning the strange nickname Dip Derrick from one of the other new characters.
Wait, Holly Wheeler, the little sister, is arguably the best character of the final.
That's what the source strongly argued. Arguably the best character of season 5.
Wow.
The fact that a recast minor character had to carry the emotional weight of the season only serves to highlight how much the core cast was failing or being sidelined. It's a symptom of the deeper character regression we're about to discuss.
And this is where the critique moves from structural failure to emotional betrayal. The source suggests that the years of investment the audience made in these characters were just invalidated by sudden regression and silence.
Absolutely. When the final moments of a beloved series arrive, you expect character culmination, not repetition. But here, the original beloved dynamics were just sacrificed for generic plot.
Let's start with the relationship at the heart of the show's adult cast, Hopper and Eleven.
They are the primary victims of this narrative backtrack. Hopper immediately reverts to being overly protective, creating the exact same conflict with Eleven that the source thought was permanently resolved in earlier seasons.
It's just an artificially recycled tension.
It is. And Eleven herself is rendered dramatically less effective. Yeah. She is laying low, and her powers are noticeably nerfed. So she's substantially sidelined for a majority of the series until the very end.
The main heroes of the show simply weren't the main drivers of the plot for most of season 5.
Not at all. And Joyce Byers, who, as we mentioned, carried season 1, gets perhaps the most devastating assessment.
Wow.
The critique states she is reduced to being window dressing. She just stands or sits around looking concerned.
Oh, that's rough.
The source notes the bitter irony. Winona Ryder's character, who was the definition of an active, driven, and often borderline manic protagonist, becomes completely passive and useless in the season where the world is literally ending.
And Lucas, too, seems completely robbed of his own agent story.
Lucas went from a primary, active member of the D&D crew to a supporting character whose sole purpose is just to be worried or sad about Max.
Right, because Max is still in a coma.
Exactly. So Lucas's entire character arc is stalled, serving only to remind the audience of Max's plight. It's an example of a character being reduced to a single emotional function rather than being a dynamic contributor.
Now we get to the Wheeler family, whose narrative transformations are described as dramatic, bordering on the absurd. Nancy, in particular, seems to have a completely new skill set.
Oh, yeah. Nancy, who is an intrepid high school reporter with a knack for journalism and a growing talent with firearms, transforms first into General Ant, a brilliant military tactician.
Okay.
And ultimately a full-fledged 80s action star, earning her the source-given nickname Nambo.
Nambo, I love it. But the critique is highly skeptical.
Very. There's no narrative groundwork for this sudden tactical genius. It feels like she was written into a role purely for the sake of the action scene, not character consistency.
And her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Jonathan. This is where the source delivered some really harsh, provocative feedback.
Yes. Jonathan, Nancy's romantic foil, is simply dismissed as useless, whiny, and gayer than Will.
Oof, that's a brutal assessment. Did the source at all acknowledge his photography skills or his general usefulness in earlier seasons? Or was his character truly reduced to a punchline in the finale?
The source material suggests that by season 5, he truly had lost all narrative relevance. He contributes virtually nothing to the plot, making him feel completely superfluous to the action.
So he's just reacting.
He's often seen reacting to Nancy's transformation rather than participating in the strategy. The critique focuses on how his character arc, or lack thereof, is completely overshadowed by his relationship woes and his inability to progress. He becomes the show's resident deadweight.
The Wheeler parents, Ted and Karen, also get dragged into a bizarre, high-stakes subplot that just defies logic.
We get a very brief moment of redemption for Ted Wheeler, the usually uninvolved, couch-bound father who manages to stand up to a demogorgon to save his family. But the writers dismiss him instantly. He ends up in a coma after his chest is ripped open. And Karen Wheeler, the matriarch, fares just as bad. She sustains truly horrific, grievous injuries. Her throat is slashed, and she is disemboweled. Yet somehow, miraculously, both survive.
That sounds like they survived purely for the sake of the epilogue, regardless of the severity of the trauma.
Precisely. The source repeatedly questions how the Wheelers, specifically Karen, are still alive after such catastrophic injuries.
And there's another plot hole there, isn't there?
A major one. Karen Wheeler appears in the epilogue with all visible signs of her severe scarring gone.
No.
The source uses this specific detail to argue that the writers were clearly prioritizing a clean, happy ending over narrative consistency or the realistic impact of violence.
Let's pivot to pacing. The source highlights a technique that actively sabotages the show's flow. Secondary viewing syndrome. This is fascinating. How does it work?
Secondary viewing or second screening is a reality of modern streaming, right? Where audiences often multitask, checking their phones, texting, scrolling while watching.
I'm guilty of it.
We all are. The source argues that writers for streaming shows have started incorporating vast amounts of show-and-tell dialogue and frequent, obvious exposition dumps specifically to cater to these secondary viewers.
So if you weren't fully paying attention, the writers made sure you could catch up quickly during the next 5-minute conversation.
Exactly. And the critique is that this forces excessive filler dialogue, the prolonged heart-to-hearts, the overwritten planning session, the constant need to over-explain things that the characters already.
And it eats up valuable screen time that should have been dedicated to action, mystery, or genuine plot progression.
Yes. It makes the show feel bloated, even when the plot is moving quick.
And finally, Robin's character arc, specifically the repeated emphasis on her sexuality. The source found this unnecessary for.
The source repeatedly highlights the extremely visible, almost insistent focus on Robin's lesbian arc throughout the final season. It's not the identity itself that is critiqued, but the way it was so awkwardly forced into key plot.
It felt like the writers were prioritizing checking a representational box over organic story.
That's the argument. The source gave an example where this forced integration became most. So there's one scene, it involves Will catching Robin being a lesbian. The show apparently wanted this moment to be highly significant, but then Robin spends significant screen time immediately afterward trying to convince Will that she wasn't doing whatever he thought she was.
Even though the scene clearly indicated otherwise.
Exactly. The source views this as a confusing, counterproductive detour that added to the overall bloat, noting that even her epilogue, where she breaks up with her girlfriend and goes to an all-girls school, is heavily laden with this singular focus.
Okay, we've established that the characters are regressing and the pacing is shot. Now let's tackle the plot itself, which spirals into unprecedented convolution, changes the fundamental rules of the world.
This is where it really goes off the rails.
Starting with the illogical military operation in Hawkins.
The military's presence starts illogical and only gets worse. Despite quarantining Hawkins and filling it with surveillance, the military still hasn't managed to find 11. Who is hiding in this small town. Their operational decision-making just defies all common sense.
And what was the decision?
They established a forward operating base in the Upside Down.
In the Upside Down?
Right next to a ruined McDonald's. This absurdity, a well-funded, heavily armed U.S. military base next to a dimensional fast food ruin, really captures the surreal tonal collapse of the series.
And what is their goal operating in this hostile dimension?
Their goal isn't to study the Upside Down's ecosystem or follow through on Brunner's previous scientific work. Their sole motivation is to weaponize 11, or somehow harness the Upside Down itself.
It just reverts the military threat back to a generic, one-dimensional 80s movie cliché rather than building on the existing lore.
Exactly. And speaking of previous critical characters, the fate of Dr. Owens is a massive unanswered question.
Right. Dr. Owens, who was the moral counterpoint to Brenner in earlier seasons and held crucial institutional knowledge, has his fate left completely up in the air.
The source points out that this is typical of the finale's disregard for loose ends. They even morbidly ask if he's simply a skeleton handcuffed to a pipe somewhere, just emphasizing the complete lack of closure for a very important character.
Next, we have an unexpected and, according to the sources, largely unwelcome character return. Number 8, Kali.
The return of Kali, Eleven's sister from Season 2, is immediately flagged because her episode was widely considered the worst episode of the entire series.
It really was.
So her return here brings dark, complex, and ultimately unresolved plot elements.
And what precisely did the military do with her?
Kali was captured by the military, and the source explains they were actively using her blood on pregnant women in a horrifying attempt to manufacture more 11.
No, that's...
It is. But Kali wasn't powerful enough for mass production, which is why their continued focus remained on recapturing 11. But this introduces a deeply dark, unresolved plot thread, the experimentation on pregnant women, which is never properly concluded. It's just tossed into the narrative soup.
It just adds this overwhelming dramatic weight that the show fails to sustain or explain.
Precise. Now for the physical reality of the Upside Down, the discovery of the meat wall. After the group has been traversing the Upside Down for 18 months, and the source stresses this point, 30 previous crawls, Hopper and 11 suddenly run into a massive circular structure, the meat wall, forming a perfect perimeter around Hawkins.
How could they have missed that?
That's the question. The sheer cognitive dissonance of this discovery is called out. How could they have missed this colossal biological barrier on 30 separate trips? It feels entirely contrived, appearing only when the plot requires.
And this wall is somehow related to Vecna's motivation, which shifts the focus to very young children.
Yes, the motivation revealed is that Vecna is now primarily targeting young, specifically children between the ages of 9 and 11. Holly Wheeler is abducted as the first example.
And he intends to use these children as vessels to reshape the world.
Yes, linking back to the idea that their innocence provides a clean slate for his nefarious dimensional merge.
This brings us to a plot point the source calls laughable, Will's new psychic ability.
This is Will's new power, referred to with heavy irony as his Gaiar sense. This ability allows him to psychically tap into the minds of Demogorgons of Vecna's victims, essentially giving him an internal radar system.
And what triggers this power?
Crucially, the source argues that this psychic ability is directly linked to him realizing and accepting it's okay to be gay.
Oh, boy.
This moment of self-acceptance apparently unleashes his full psychic potential, allowing him to crush descending demogorgons with his mind. The show ties his newfound confidence and identity directly into his superhero abilities,
creating a moment the source views as forced and overly literal, a slavish adherence to the message, designed to address previous critique about repetition.
That's the argument, yeah. Now, for the biggest, most fundamental lore shift of the seat, the nature of the Upside Down itself. This changes everything the audience thought.
Okay.
It's a complete retcon. Dustin stumbles upon Brenner's previously hidden research note in the Upside Down version of Hawkins' lab. These notes reveal that the Upside Down is not another dimension mirroring Hawkins. It is a wormhole leading to a completely separate alien world called the Abyss, or Dimension X, where all the monsters truly originate.
So Vecna isn't just trying to control the Upside Down, he's trying to merge this new Dimension X with Earth.
Exactly. This shift in terminology from dimension to wormhole to Dimension X is seen by the critique as unnecessary complexity added at the last minute. It makes the world building feel unstable, like changing the rules right as the game is ending.
And what did they say the meat wall was made of, if not dark magic?
Well, Dustin initially theorized the meat wall was a Return of the Jedi-style dark magic shield generator, which he deduced was housed somewhere in the Upside Down lab.
That would have been cool.
It would have. But the explanation provided is far more vague and scientific sounding. It's made of exotic matter. The source argues that the exotic matter explanation is deeply unsatisfying and less compelling than the idea of a dark magic shield generator, which at least maintained the horror fantasy tone. Scientific jargon was introduced where fantasy storytelling should have been prioritized.
And this leads to arguably the most egregious point of audience betrayal, the infamous play problem.
This is a major source of listener frustration. Vecna's full origin story, including how he killed a specific government scientist in a cave to acquire the evil black stone in a mystery box, and his earlier unknown childhood connection to characters like Joyce and Hopper, is not fully explained in the television series itself.
Of course.
It is only fully revealed in the non-canonical, or at least externally canonical, stage play Stranger, the first shadow, running in New York and London.
Wait. You mean the creators decided to gatekeep crucial foundational lore required to understand the central villain's motivation behind a physical, expensive, inaccessible stage production?
That is precisely the betrayal. Tickets for that play are expensive, and the vast majority of the global viewing audience, the people who poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the franchise, would never see.
So vital, unanswered questions in the streaming show were outsourced to a completely separate...
Yes, the critique is furious that the answers to questions like the exact nature of the Black Stone or Vecna's full relationship with other key characters were just elsewhere. It makes the finale feel incomplete and intellectually insulting to the core audience.
The final approach to Vecna is where the source material completely breaks down, describing a descent into dizzyingly self-indulgent convolution. Let's try to walk the listener through what the source calls the mind hop maze.
This is where narrative clarity went to die. It's a sequence of psychic layers piled on top of each other that makes you work incredibly hard for minimal payoff.
Okay, break it.
It starts with the victims, the abducted children, including Holly and Mac, who are trapped inside Henry Creel's memory. These memories include his childhood home and the safe cave from his youth.
So the children's minds are trapped within a memory within the villain's mind, then Will gets pulled in.
Correct. Vecna takes over Will's mind, utilizing Will's gayer sense as a conduit, but Will, using his new powers, manages to hack Henry's Wi-Fi.
Oh, Lord.
And this psychic connection is somehow powered by a revived Demogorgon that the group animated using an external 50,000-watt radio tower in the real world. This is the level of technical specificity and psychic complexity we're dealing with.
So the Demogorgon acts as a psychic antenna.
Essentially, this hack then allows Vecna, who is currently inside Will's mind, to locate Max, who is comatose in a hospital bed in the real world.
The source highlights the absurdity here, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Vecna, the supposed master schemer, somehow needed a psychic Demogorgon Wi-Fi hack to figure out that a child in a coma might be located in a hospital.
And then we bring in the cavalry, Eleven and Collie.
Eleven and Collie then connect their minds to Max's mind, which is trying to guide the children out of Henry. It's an excessive chain of nested mental spaces.
I'm already lost.
Right. Will's mind takes over Vecna's mind, allowing Max's mind and Holly's mind to escape within Henry's mind. Then Vecna's mind takes over Will's mind again to find Max in the real world. It required Robin to use visual aids like records and album cover to even attempt an explanation of this strategy, which just highlights how confusing the writers knew it was.
Wow. Yeah, the audience feedback shows that the sheer density of this narrative structure was exhausting rather than engaging.
It loses all sense of danger because you can no longer track the threat level. The source describes this sequence as proof that the writers were more in love with their convoluted concept than with telling a clear, emotionally resonant story.
If that wasn't enough to induce whiplash, the penultimate episode features a source called the second dumbest scene.
This is the moment where Jonathan and Nancy, trapped inside the melting Hawkins lab and facing certain death, decide to tearfully become unengaged touchhead.
I mean, trapped in a melting lab, facing certain death, and they chose that exact moment for tearful It sounds like emotional manipulation over organic.
The critique is fierce.
Yeah.
It makes zero sense from a character standpoint or a stakes standpoint. Why break up when you might die in the next 5 minutes?
It was purely an attempt to generate unnecessary, forced sentiment.
Exactly. Especially given the actors' real-life relationship, which made the on-screen moment feel even more strained and manufactured. It was the epitome of a melodramatic pause in the face of imminent global catastrophe.
All this convolution stalls the finale, leading into what the source calls the kitchen sink finale. How rushed was the final battle?
Shockingly rushed. The series spends hours building this threat, only to defeat it in minutes. The final battle throws everything at the screen, resulting in a severe genre shift.
What do you mean?
We have Nancy, Joyce, and the kids, armed with ludicrously rudimentary weapons like slingshots and petrol balloons, fighting Vecna.
Okay.
Who is controlling a massive, digitized kaiju mech suit with the abducted children trapped inside.
A kaiju mech suit in 1987, Hawkins, fighting slingshot-wielding teenagers. That is a tonal disaster.
It confirms the caricature critique. The defeat is incredibly swift. 11 finally shows up, rips her way into the kaiju, and the battle culminates with Joyce getting her moment, hacking off Vecna's head.
And the entire fight scene lasts.
Only a few minutes longer than Will's coming out scene. It's just over.
And even the countdown timer was chosen for maximum nostalgia, not practicality.
Absolutely. The C4 is set to explode once Prince's side B of Purple Rain comes to an end. This is a highly specific, nostalgic reference designed purely for cultural recognition rather than a practical countdown mechanism.
But the pacing is what truly astonishes.
It is. Vecna is defeated, and the world is saved in the first hour as the 2-hour and 8-minute episode. The core conflict is resolved less than halfway through the grand finale.
So if the world is saved an hour in, what occupies the time before the moment that was dubbed the most memeable moment of 25?
This is the extended, overwrought group session before the climax. It was a 6-minute scene that the Duffer Brothers reportedly spent 12 hours shooting, giving every single ensemble member a moment to chime in.
A source called this
An overwritten, overcooked, self-indulgent circle jerk of a virtue signal.
Yikes. And this is the moment where Will finally comes out.
Yes, Will finally comes out as gay in this hyper-public setting, in what is, in the show's timeline, the equivalent of the year 2025.
And the critique here is that the execution was terrible.
Awful. It was too late in the series. It was too public shared with the entire huge ensemble, including new characters like Collie, whom Will barely knows.
So it was criticized for taking Will's emotional, internal struggle and externalizing.
Yes, turning his superpower into being gay. A moment described as a slavish adherence to the message, to satisfy external demands for representation, rather than providing the intimate, earned moment of self-acceptance the character deserved.
Since the main conflict wraps up in the first hour, we are left with a massive hour-long epilogue. The sources describe this as the best part of the entire season, but feel it's rendered irrelevant because it follows such a rushed, disappointing climax.
It's the emotional dessert after a terrible main course. It functions as an extended graduation scene, focusing entirely on tying up every character in a neat, happy.
So what happened?
We see Dustin graduate the way Eddie Munson wanted him. Robin breaks up with her girlfriend and heads to an all-girls school, a detail the source notes tracks with the show's preoccupation with her identity.
And the futures of Nancy and Jonathan are painted with broad, perhaps ironic strokes.
Nancy quits college to pursue journalism, achieving the feminist dream, which somehow translates into landing a $10,000 a month studio apartment in a major city right out of the gate.
Which is real.
And Jonathan goes to NYU to study film with the stated intention of making anti-capitalist movies. The source finds the irony hard to ignore, given the show's nearly $500 million budget came from the very system he plans to critique.
And the other core adult, Steve, seems to have a surprisingly domestic conclusion.
Steve's is said to have the best ending, settling down in Hawkins, seemingly content to become a domestic figure ready to have 6 children. Hopper proposes to Joyce, and they are set to move to Montauk, Long Island, a location intentionally chosen because it is the center of many real-world, highly public military conspiracy theories, bringing the show full circle on its initial influences.
And Will's
new future is defined by his location. He ends up in a gay bar in the 80s.
Then there's the final the fate of 11, which the Duffer Brothers controversially left up to the audience.
Mike tells an extended, convoluted story explaining 11's survival. She supposedly faked her death during the climax using Collie's projected image ability, but the source meticulously details the plot holes this creates. Collie should have been dead. She was either shot or blown up with the laugh. Furthermore, the sonic weapon used in the climax should have rendered 11 unable to use her powers to communicate this deception.
So the source condemns this ambiguity as a major cop.
Completely. It leaves fans confused about the fate of the central hero and fuels those desperate fan theories that a secret episode 9 exists to fix everything.
That brings us to the most damning part of the postmortem, the laundry list of plot holes that the finale simply ignores.
The list is extensive, reflecting the series' ultimate failure to prioritize narrative cohesion over spectacle. The legitimate questions left unanswered include: 1. The escape. How exactly did the heroes escape the Abyss Dimension Act? Did they miraculously hop rocks or somehow climb the wormhole tower?
2. Toxicity. Why was the Upside Down suddenly no longer toxic to humans, allowing them to establish a military to traverse it freely?
3. Wormhole logic. Logistically, how did blowing up the wormhole not create a massive vacuum or black hole that immediately sucked in the entire town of Hawkins?
4. The meat wall. What happened to the gigantic circular meat wall that suddenly appeared? Did it vanish or is it still there?
And 5. Unresolved character. What was the final fate of the crucial character Dr. Owens, and what happened to Derek's family, who were last seen tied up in a barn?
And the unresolved health status of the parents, Karen and Ted.
Absolutely. The source hammers this point. How are Karen and Ted Wheeler still alive after sustaining such horrific, life-threatening injuries, and why did Karen's severe scars disappear without explanation?
And
Furthermore, the military, after dozens of servicemen were killed and witnessing undeniable paranormal activity, is just said to have just fucked off. They simply packed up and left without consequence or explanation.
And let's just reiterate the ultimate offense regarding the lore. Introducing crucial story elements only in the expensive, inaccessible New York or London play.
It is the pinnacle of the betrayal, the origin of the evil Blackstone, the mystery box scientist. All of it relegated to a costly side project. The writers clearly couldn't fit the complexity into the final season, so they punted.
Forcing dedicated fans to either pay hundreds of dollars for a play or simply accept the narrative gap.
Yep. And the most damning critique about the lack of answers seems to come directly from the creators themselves in post-mortem interviews.
Confirming the general feeling that they simply moved on.
Yes. The Duffer Brothers' post-mortem answers for most of these legitimate, lingering questions consisted of the highly criticized cop-out. It happened off-screen.
It happened off-screen. That's the answer.
That's the answer. It confirmed the suspicion that the creator simply forgot about or chose to ignore major lingering plot points, including the Demogorgons, Demidogs, and Demibath, which were conveniently absent during the climactic battle despite the world end.
So given all this, what was the ultimate audience reaction and the resulting fan coping mechanism?
The Rotten Tomatoes audience score plummeted to an abysmal 56%. The backlash was legitimate, leading to insane cope theories.
Right. The Secret, Episode 9.
The most pervasive theory showing the fans' desperation for a fic is that the entire finale is actually an illusion constructed by Vecna, and a secret, superior Episode 9 will eventually drop to reset the narrative.
The source material notes the desperation of this hope, but also acknowledges that Vecna winning and trapping everyone in a matrix might have actually been a more compelling, if nihilistic, narrative.
It might have been. So what's the final verdict from the source material?
The critique concludes that Stranger Things 5 is without a doubt the worst season of the series. Moreover, it actively harms the entire show's legacy, claiming it brings down all of those previous seasons, even Season 1.
Wow.
The show became a caricature of itself, lost its immersion and authenticity, and was irrevocably crushed by the weight of its bloated cast-derived event. The high stakes they tried to create in the end were lost due to poor rendering the climax devoid of tension unearned.
If we connect this detailed critique to the bigger picture, the failure is clear.